Comfortable night. Fine starts to tomorrow. Most places dry with plenty of sunshine. Again, if you're after rainfall, it's not good news across the south. Sunny spells tending to disappear through the day with a bit more cloud bubbling up across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there will be some showers across northern Britain again tomorrow. Temperature-wise, well, again, certainly a lot cooler and fresher than earlier in the week. 23, 24 across the southeast, generally further north, we're only looking at high teens. So again, on the cool side, a cool start to the weekend. Signs of things turning warmer as we go into next week, but again, not much in the way of rainfall across the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Mercy Moroki on your TV, radio and online.
Yes, we've got lots coming up for you today. We're here until midday, getting straight to the point of today's biggest stories with our expert guests, as well as lots of opinion.
Make sure you get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to those as we go throughout the show. But first of all, it is time for today's latest news.
Good morning, it's 2 minutes past 10 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Interest rates are widely expected to go up again for the 6th time in a row. We can go now to our GB News reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's at the Bank of England in central London. Paul, why exactly are rates rising?
Yeah, hi Simon. One word, inflation. The bank wants to control the general rise in prices, and it thinks that by taking money out of our pockets, because we have to spend more on mortgages, then it's going to cool our spending, and that will help to keep inflation under control, even though many people point out inflation is supply side driven. It's caused by a lack of supply when it comes to fuel, to energy, as we've seen with high energy bills. Nevertheless, the bank is pulling on these levers so it can try and control inflation, also to stop a potential wage price spiral. That is, many of us think the high prices are going to continue, so we go to our employers, we ask for pay rises, and then pay rises mean that businesses have higher costs, and so they pass that on in the form of prices, and prices end up chasing wages, etc. Many people think, hey, maybe we don't need to do that because this is supply side and interest rates need to stay the same. Nevertheless, we do expect interest rates to go up by 0.5%. That will be the biggest increase for almost 30 years. The announcement will be made at midday, and it'll affect just under 1.8 million people with tracker or standard variable rate mortgages in the UK.
Yeah, we'll check back in with you, Paul, when we get that announcement. But for now, thank you very much. That's Paul Hawkins live there at the Bank of England. Ofgem has announced the energy price cap will now be updated every 3 months instead of every 6, warning customers face a very challenging winter ahead. It says the change will go some way to provide stability in the energy market, making sure customers are only paying the real cost of their energy. Ofgem boss Jonathan Brewery cites Russia's actions in Ukraine as being behind the volatile energy market, leading to a surge in gas and electric prices. The family of Archie Battersbee say they have made an application to the High Court to move him to a hospice. The 12-year-old's parents now want him to move from the Royal London Hospital for his last moments to give him what they've called a dignified death. Archie suffered brain damage and went into a coma in April. Speaking to GB News, Attorney General Suella Braverman called the situation tragic.
This is a very, very complex matter. Of course, the parents have the best interests of Archie at the forefront of their mind. Weighed against that are clinical considerations and medical opinions. And I know that English judges will have considered this very sensitively, very thoroughly, and have reached the right decision.
In the latest hustings for the Conservative leadership race, Rishi Sunak again attacked Liz Truss's economic policies. The Foreign Secretary reiterated her promises to cut tax and grow the economy without driving prices higher. However, the former Chancellor warned against cutting taxes before inflation is brought under control. Latest polling shows Mr Sunak is trailing behind his rival, but he's insisted he was hopeful.
Apply that same urgency, that same energy, that same grip and radicalism to tackling all of our problems, reforming public services, growing the economy, tackling migration, putting in practice those conservative values of hard work, of aspiration, of hope that we all hold dear to build a better Britain. But more than that, I promise you all this. I will give you my everything, my heart and my soul, everything I've got.
Rishi Sunak there. Meanwhile, Ms Truss is also coming under renewed pressure to make good on a promise she reportedly made to a group of war widows to restore their pension payments. A change in the law in 2015 means war widows who remarry no longer lose their £7,000 a year payment, but around 300 service widows who married before 2015 have not had their widow's pension restored. They claim Liz Truss, as Chief Secretary to the Treasury 4 years ago, promised to right that wrong. Tensions are escalating between the US and China, with Beijing staging its largest military exercise near Taiwan so far. It includes live ammunition drills and more than a dozen warplanes in the waters surrounding the region. China is accusing the US of playing with fire after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi met with Taiwan's president yesterday. She's the most senior US politician to visit that country in 25 years. Taiwan is a self-governing democracy that China considers part of its territory. The amount of coral growth at Australia's Great Barrier Reef has reached record levels. Researchers say parts of the reef has seen the most coral growth in 36 years, but experts warn it's still vulnerable to threats. They say mass bleaching and climate change could quickly unravel the progress made. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to the point.
A very good morning. The time 10:07, and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Bev Turner on your TV, radio and online. And we are here until midday again. So here's what we've got for you.
Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss faced off in a hustings of Conservative Party members last night. Former Health Secretary Sajid Javid, who was the first to resign, of course, has come out for Truss. Is there anything Sunak can do to stop the momentum behind Truss's campaign? We're going to be discussing that.
Yes, and new figures reveal the shocking extent of drug deaths across England and Wales, which begs the question, is it time to take a completely different approach to how we deal with drugs in this country? We'll get to the heart of that question a bit later on.
And the wholesale price of petrol has dropped, but new figures show this simply isn't being reflected in the prices we pay at the pumps. Why not? We're going to be discussing what more can be done to help motorists.
Yes, that's all coming up and much more as well across the programme. As we said, we're here until midday as usual, and you can get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let us know what you think, because we will be reading some of those throughout the programme. But first, Bev gives her views on the tragic story of Archie Battersbee.
We're hopefully going to be hearing from Archie's mum soon, and when she does speak to the cameras, we will bring it to you. But I'm sure you're familiar with it. It is a story about the life and the death of a much-loved, energetic little boy. But it is much more than that. It's about the relationship between the state and the individual. It's about who ultimately makes enormous decisions about our children. And it's very much about medics versus mothers. We've all watched Archie's mother, Holly Dance, appearing on media outlets, including GBNews, since her fight went public. She defies all assumptions about a mum facing her worst fear. She is calm, she is rational, articulate, and full of common sense. She's tapping into reserves of strength and dignity that frightened mothers fighting for their child do not know they have until they need them. We've watched Holly argue that all she's asking for is time to see if Archie improves, especially as the worst-case chronological scenarios that the family were given have not materialised. Her son is fighting on, and she can see that. Asking for time does not seem unreasonable. In 2010, I got the phone call that everyone dreads to say that someone that I loved had been injured. My then-husband, Olympian James Cracknell, had been hit by a truck while cycling across America, and he was in a coma. He'd sustained a very serious brain injury, and I didn't know as I boarded the plane whether he would be alive or dead when I got off. I know what it's like to be met by a team of white coats and name badges, to start a steep learning curve of medical language and to have difficult conversations when I could see that James's care was not optimum. But the comparison with Archie and Holly ends there. We were lucky. James survived, albeit with challenges. And I was caring for my husband, not my child. I don't know how I would have got out of bed in the morning had it been my son. But what I learnt during that nightmare and in the preceding 8 years that we remained married was that doctors do not always get it right, particularly when it comes to the area of neurology, of which we know surprisingly little. It seems that neurologists are a uniquely negative type of doctor. I was warned that James would never be able to look after the children on his own. He'd never drive. He'd suffer regular seizures. He would make no improvement whatsoever, they said, after 3 years. All of that was proven wrong. Archie was injured less than 4 months ago, and in brain injury terms, that is nothing. Surely the hospital could have agreed to a few more months. I do wonder, what is their rush? Holly now says that with all legal routes exhausted, she wants Archie transferred to a hospice to pass away. She must be granted this request. In his book, Being Mortal, surgeon Atul Gawande concludes that contrary to much Western thought, there is such a thing as a good death. He argues that our lives have narrative. We all want to be the authors of our own stories. That is natural. And in stories, endings matter. I remember hearing a mother speak at a conference once. She learnt late on in her pregnancy that her baby had died in utero. She'd planned a home birth and she was advised by doctors that this was now a bad idea. Why? She asked. My baby has already died, she said. She hired a private midwife and gave birth to her deceased baby in a pool at home and told the story to a room of damp eyes as a really positive experience. When fate had taken away control, she had taken some back, and that allowed her to live life with fewer demons. Holly Dance has been trying to create the best possible last chapter for her son. She must now be allowed to transfer Archie to a hospice, away from the negativity and acrimony of that hospital setting. This story and that family need to move away from turmoil and conflict to a space of compassion and love. Holly has already admitted that she will need some serious therapy, as she said at some stage. The dam of emotion that she's kept at bay will burst at some point, but that will be made less painful if she can be given some agency at this stage of the process. For Holly, Archie's siblings and even their own children one day, the route to healing can be helped, even at this late stage. The doctors and lawyers must do the right thing and listen to the instincts of the mother.
Have you changed your mind on this? Because I know we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago when you were presenting, and you were quite in two minds, I think, as to whether she should listen to the doctors or actually she should have the final say. What's the journey you've gone on with that?
What it is, Mercy, I think when I first saw Holly talking, I did think, well, there must be two sides to this story, you know, and the doctors probably do know, right, we are all conditioned, aren't we, to see a white cone and name badge and presume that people always get it right. And I've just watched really carefully, and I've watched her come up with examples of people who have recovered from being, you know, in the sort of state that Archie is in. And then I thought about my own experience, and I've just kind of laid it on top, I suppose, of what I went through. And then considered how the neurologists were with us and how they didn't, as I say, they didn't always get it right. And when I've also listened to her talking, it doesn't seem to me that she's being unrealistic. She isn't saying, give him a couple of weeks and he's going to be bouncing out of bed. She's full of common sense, she's full of rationality. And all she's asking for is time. And I suppose I think, well, that doesn't seem too much. That doesn't seem too much to ask.
I think from the beginning, I've always thought, in many ways, this is a moral question because, as you say, doctors don't always get it right. And when we're talking about something that we still don't know a lot about, such as neurology, and just how the brain works and the power of the brain when it is in a condition like this, I think it's really not black and white. There's too many grey areas. And so then I think it becomes a moral question of, well, who's to decide who's to decide what's right for what's best for him. And ultimately, I've always said I think it's the mother because I've put myself in her shoes. And if I thought if I had any indication at all that my child could recover in any way, shape or form. And that's what Archie's mum has said. She thinks she still has movement. She says that he has gripped her hand when they've said he's basically dead. And so if there is an offer to take him somewhere else, if there is another option, I think she should be allowed to take that option.
I do. I really do. And I think also what I've realised is when she's stood there in front of the camera and she said, you know, there is no sign of organ failure that they said there would be, and he is exceeding those expectations and those lines in the sand that were drawn by the doctors. That's when, for me, I kind of remembered as actually that happened to us a lot.
There's countless stories of people who the doctors have said, look, this person's only got a few months to live or whatever, and that person has gone on to live a very healthy life. In fact, we had somebody get in touch yesterday, one of our viewers, and give us a story like that and told us they went on to live for decades after doctors said that they wouldn't live. So doctors don't always get it right. And what I would say is, you know, the NHS or the taxpayers are faced with a £2 billion bill and a rising bill for claims of medical negligence, people suing the NHS for making the wrong decisions and winning those cases. And so I don't think when you look at situations like that, you can say that doctors are always right.
Absolutely, and I just feel for the family, I really do. And I think, I feel like if they would just give them some more time, even just come to an agreement between the family and the doctors, let's give it 6 months. You know, I'm sure, as I said in my monologue, it's about, for that whole family to recover, Holly Downs has to feel that she can be given some sort of control of this situation, because the most terrifying thing for any parent is that something is happening to your child that you have no control over.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let us know what you think. GBNews, GBviews at gbnews.uk. We are expecting to hear from Holly Downs, Archie Battersbee's mother, very shortly, so we will bring you that live as and when we have it. But let's move on to our top story for today, which is last night, Tory leadership candidates Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak addressed an audience of Conservative Party members, this time in Cardiff.
During the address, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak said he would try and make countries take back their failed asylum seekers to the UK.
Because at the moment, we have this slightly absurd situation that we'll go and talk to a country about signing a trade deal with them and giving them access to our market. We'll even go further and say, actually, here's some aid from our aid budget to help you. And whilst we're doing all of that, we slightly neglect to say, oh, hang on, can you take back your failed asylum seekers?
Well, meanwhile, Liz Truss hit out at Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, saying that she was using the resources of the Scottish Government for her own independence ambitions.
What's happening in Scotland is the entire resources of the Scottish Government are being used to run essentially an independence campaign. And I think that is grossly irresponsible. The Scottish Government are not delivering for the people of Scotland. They are simply spending their time, and Nicola Sturgeon is spending her time agitating for independence.
So ahead of the hustings last night, former Chancellor Sajid Javid backed Liz Truss to become the next Conservative leader, calling for urgent tax cuts in an attack on her rival Rishi Sunak's economic plans.
Yes, well, our political correspondent Tom Harwood was watching last night and joins us now. We mentioned there that Sajid Javid was, of course, the first cabinet minister to resign, closely followed, I think, 10 minutes later by Rishi Sunak. So he almost started this whole thing. Is he the one who's going to end Rishi Sunak's campaign effectively and, you know, put the final nail in it?
Well, it is remarkable. It's only a month since that first resignation happened. And then, of course, the 4 following days of up to 60 resignations, the toppling of Boris Johnson and the rest of it. It's felt like months and months and months, but it's really only been a few weeks. But it's fascinating looking at the timing of Sajid Javid's announcement last night. It came only around half an hour after a Conservative Home member survey showed a similar sort of lead for Liz Truss that the YouGov poll showed the day before, and indeed a higher lead than YouGov showed a week ago for Liz Truss, this is. It does seem that the polls would have to be extraordinarily wrong, really unprecedentedly so, for Liz Truss not to have this race relatively sewn up. So to some extent we could ask the question, is Sajid Javid making a bold stand of leadership here, or is he following the herd? Because to some extent
I think he's looking after himself.
It does
Isn't he lining himself up to be a member of Liz Truss's cabinet? Surely he's waited, he's watched, he's hedged his bets, and now he's backing the winner.
Well, to some extent many might argue that. On the other hand, what the Liz Truss campaign might want to say is that it's better to have these announcements, rather than all in one go, be able to be fed out sort of day after day to make the news each day. It's possible, it's not impossible, that Sajid Javid said a few days ago to Liz that he wants to back her, and they said, OK, hold off for this announcement until the right moment in the media cycle, because we have seen about 1 endorsement per day. Now, that's not based on any evidence, but if you're running a campaign, you need things to fill up your news grid, and that could be some sort of scheduled point there. But also, I think, if we look at Sajid Javid's own run for the leadership not so long ago, of course, he didn't make it over that first threshold to be nominated into those initial stages, but he put forward a pretty comprehensive prospectus in terms of what he wanted to do as Prime Minister, and that involved reversing the national insurance increase, abandoning the corporation tax hike, similar policies to those that are being advanced by Liz Truss. So perhaps from an ideological point of view, as well as a political point of view, it might make more sense.
OK, thank you very much, Tom. It's only 4 weeks. It feels like 4 weeks. Is that all it is? It feels like 6 months, doesn't it? We've been talking about this, but you've done a brilliant job, Tom.
And there's 4 weeks left to go until we find out who's going to be our next Prime Minister. But after the break, new figures show that drug-related deaths in England and Wales are on the rise. We're asking, is this a result of lockdowns? Is this the breaking answers? In just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory.
twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, it's 10:24. You are watching and listening to The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Mercy Moroki on GB News. We are live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now more and more people are dying as a result of using drugs across England and Wales. According to new figures from the Office for National Statistics, there were over 4,800 drug deaths related to drug poisoning in England and Wales in 2021.
This is the 9th consecutive annual rise, up 6.2% from the previous year, and the highest number since records began more than a quarter of a century ago in 1993. The ONS said that the overall rising trend over the past decade has been driven primarily by deaths involving opiates, but also those involving other substances such as cocaine.
Yes, well, many would say that clearly our current approach to drugs is not stopping or reducing the number of deaths. Of course, we're used to hearing about drug deaths in Scotland, but these figures, as we say, are for England and Wales. Well, here to discuss this in more detail is Ant Lehane, who's lead policy consultant at Cranston, which is an organisation that provides services for those facing difficulties with things like domestic abuse, alcohol and other drug-related problems. Good morning, great to have you in again. So just talk us through these new figures and why they're particularly significant.
I think it's incredibly worrying. We've had 9 years now of year-on-year increases in relation to drug-related deaths. The death figures are at unprecedented levels and have been for a number of years. Now, I know that we've sort of tried to bring in a number of different measures, as we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, in regards to the new Home Office white paper, but it's clear that the current approach isn't working. We're seeing, an awful amount of death. I think it was 4,839 people died last year. In Priti Patel's own words, that is more people who died more people died from drugs compared to knife crime and fatalities on the road combined. So it's a serious issue.
They must be predominantly young people as well, are they, Ant?
I think it could be anyone. You know, it could be sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, loved ones. This doesn't discriminate. I think the vast majority of people would be people with problematic use disorders. However, anyone can die of a drug death. So, yes.
So just help me to understand this a little bit then. So these aren't necessarily suicides. These aren't overdoses as such. When it's drug-related deaths, what does that mean?
So I believe they break it down into drug poisoning, and then there's some other factor, I think, for intentional overdoses. My understanding is that the vast majority of these, I don't want to speculate, I believe, will be accidental overdoses.
Right.
People who didn't set out to want to die because they injected that substance or inhaled that substance.
Yeah, Scotland has also seen a year-on-year increase as well, hasn't it? And is also at its highest drug-related death levels. Does this have to do with population rise? Does this, what's driving this? Because you could argue that more and more money and there's more understanding of drugs and addiction than ever before, and yet the numbers do keep going up and up. So clearly there's a massive critical failure somewhere.
Yes, I think so. It is frankly a national disgrace that the country as big as ours, that has as big an economy as ours, has such bad figures compared to the rest of Europe. The UK has a drug death rate that is 3 times higher than the second country, which is Germany. And then Scotland has a drug death rate that is 3 times higher than the rest of the UK. There is definitely issues linked to poverty, to deprivation, but I think also a lack of policy making and a lack of education. So yes, we're talking about these issues a lot, but we're not actually getting the funding and the policy change that we need to force these things through.
Something, Anne, has gone so horribly wrong, isn't it? Because we should now have... We should be seeing drug use go down. If we were succeeding as a society, our drug use would be falling. Because what? Why? Because people would be happier. Because presumably it is a state of misery or boredom or depression that drives young people to drugs to escape the mundanity or the sadness of their life.
Yes.
Is that a simplistic analysis, or is that it's like there's a spiritual vacuum which is being filled with drugs?
Yeah, I think it's a sort of fair analysis. I'd say that the people who tend to have the most problematic relationships with drugs, as with alcohol, there tends to be something underlying, i.e. that person might be incredibly unhappy, they might have been abused as a child, or bereavement, or life's just got out of hand, or stress or something. But there will also be those people who just are inquisitive, who wanted to go and try an ecstasy tablet for the first time, who didn't have the education they needed, that then perished. However, I think we need to be dealing with the thicker end of the death wedge. A lot of people with problematic use disorders who are simply not getting the help that they need. I think I talked about this last time, but an overdose prevention centre, for example, could be piloted in this country, places where people can go and inject substances, but also they can get the sort of care that they need. A lot of people using these services who inject heroin every day wouldn't be getting any kind of drug education. They might not understand that actually there are safer ways to do this. And I think we're at such critical levels. It is about keeping people alive and trying to help people.
Can I just ask you something? It says here that among males, there were 109 drug poisoning deaths registered per million people. This was in 2020. This was compared to 49.8 deaths for females. So essentially more than twice the number of males were dying as a result of this. We can't ignore that because there's a massive disparity. That is not explained there. What do you think is behind that huge gap?
It's, again, a very good question. I don't want to speculate, but I wonder if talking about, this on the thicker end of the wedge, on the death side of things, if this again is linked to something like trauma. I think there's a much higher male suicide rate, for example. I don't know, something to do with toxic masculinity. I don't particularly want to speculate, but it is really stark, the gender issue. However, when you break it down in some local regional areas, there is an issue whereby women who take something like heroin might try and take the same dose as their male counterpart, and then that might involve them passing, because obviously the amount needed for a lady tends to be smaller than the amount needed for a man on average.
It's chilling stuff, isn't it?
It is. It's just, it's tragic. And, this is 4,839 people. I think well over 1,000 in Scotland as well. This is tens of thousands of families who've had their lives wrecked. A lot of these deaths would have been very sudden. A lot of these people aren't particularly old.
And we can't neglect the impact that lockdowns had,
no, absolutely.
Particularly with teenagers. And bizarrely, I've got an 18-year-old, and so that transition, that sort of 16, 17 to 18, 19 during the last 2 years has been really, really tough for a lot of teenagers. And they almost had too much freedom, and I know that sounds funny, but whereby they might be making that transition to adulthood and having kind of parties where the parents might have been upstairs watching TV in the bedroom and the kids were downstairs. Nobody wanted to have groups of teenagers in their house. So what the teenagers did is they all congregated on riverbanks, on commons, in parks. Vaping has gone through the roof. Smoking has gone through the roof. They were all drinking. It's a terrible state of affairs, and I can't help but think these figures are going to go up again next year.
And it's always something we fear in the space that I work in this charity space, these figures coming out, because we've seen on the ground, things aren't particularly great, but also there is things that we could be doing that we're not doing now. We tend to talk about these things a lot. I come on to talk about these things a lot, but until we get the adequate funding, until there's a uniformed response and people are singing from the same hymn sheet, these will continue to rise. And you're absolutely right. And there's a mental health crisis in this country linked to lockdown, linked to a number of other things, and drug use can be the escapism, and it's about keeping people alive and educating people.
Thank you, Ant. Ant Lehane there, lead policy consultant, and Cransdown. We got loads of views, but I'm afraid we've not got to them, but we'll do it after the break, won't we?
We will indeed. And after that break, we'll be discussing the high cost of petrol at the pump. Turns out that the wholesale cost of petrol has actually dropped by 20p, but not much of that has been passed on to consumers. I'm sure you would have noticed. So we'll talk about that after this morning's headlines.
Hello, it's 10:33. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Interest rates are widely expected to go up again for the sixth time in a row. They currently stand at 1.25%, but it could go up by 0.5% today, the largest increase in nearly 30 years. The Bank of England will announce its decision later, hoping to slow the rate of rising prices. The UK is already at its highest level of inflation in 4 decades. Ofgem has announced the energy price cap will now be updated every 3 months instead of every 6, warning customers face a very challenging winter ahead. It says the change will go some way to provide what they're calling stability in the energy market, making sure customers are only paying the real cost of their energy. The family of Archie Battersbee say they have made an application to the High Court to move him to a hospice. The 12-year-old's parents now want to move him from the Royal London Hospital for his last moments to give him what they've called a dignified death. Archie suffered brain damage and went into a coma in April. In the latest hustings for the Conservative leadership race, Rishi Sunak again attacked Liz Truss's economic policies. The Foreign Secretary reiterated her promises to cut tax and grow the economy without driving prices higher. However, the former Chancellor warned against cutting taxes before inflation is brought under control. They face each other again later today in a televised debate in Cardiff. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.217 to the dollar. The pound is 1.194 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,461, 77 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, it's 37 past 10 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki and Bev Turner on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Now, the mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersbee says that their family's legal battle is at an end. The family have now sought legal permission to move him from the Royal London Hospital to a hospice, but doctors have warned there is significant risk in moving him.
Yes, well, let's now get the latest from our reporter, Ellie Costello. Ellie, good morning. We were expecting Archie's mum to speak this morning, but we're told that's no longer happening. Can you just fill us in?
Yes, of course. So we were all ready here to listen to Holly Dance, that is the mother of Archie Battersbee. She was going to come out and address the press about this new legal bid they have submitted this morning. The deadline for that was at 9 o'clock. We know that they met that deadline. That new legal bid is in, but we have heard that she is not able to come and address the press now this morning. This has all got, and I quote, too much for her. I'm sure that we will hear from her later later. But I'm sure we can all appreciate just how emotional and stressful this is for her, that deadline at 9 o'clock. It must have been very stressful getting that all together. And now, of course, she has another legal hearing to face, so we can all understand perhaps why she doesn't want to come and address the press right now. But basically, this is a new legal action about where Archie Battersbee should go to die. Previously, it's been about whether or not his life support machine should be switched off. All of those legal avenues for that bit have now been exhausted. That's after the European Court of Human Rights. They declined to even intervene in that case yesterday. So now we're into a separate legal bid about whether or not Archie Battersbee can be moved to a hospice. Now, I have got some information about the detail of that new legal bid that went in at 9 o'clock this morning. I'm going to share that with you now. It says, as well as applying to allow the family to transfer Archie to a hospital away from what they describe as a highly charged atmosphere at the hospital, lawyers have also applied for oxygen to be given to Archie if and when life support is removed. And that follows the case of one-year-old Alfie Evans in 2018, a very traumatic case. And that is where Alfie's family were legally not allowed to give him oxygen after his life support had been withdrawn. And in that case, it actually led to the family members of Alfie Evans giving the one-year-old mouth-to-mouth as he made attempts to breathe, which is obviously very traumatic to think about. And clearly, the Battersbee family have included that detail in their legal bid because they're thinking about the last moments of Archie's life, and they want it to be as comfortable and as dignified for him as possible. So that's a new detail that we're hearing there. And I also have a written statement from Archie's mother, Holly Dance. She couldn't be here with us in person, but she has given us this statement. She says, if Archie is declined oxygen, if and when life support is removed, I will continue to give him oxygen. I pray that the High Court will do the right thing. If they refuse permission for us to take him to a hospice and for him to receive oxygen, it will simply be inhumane. This is nothing about Archie's dignity. She says the whole system has been stacked against us. We will fight to the end for Archie's right to life. So we're hearing there that that new fight, that new legal bid will be about where Archie should die, and there is that detail we just heard there about being able to give him oxygen in his final moments. And now there is a question about the timeline of all of this now. I have just been on the phone to Christian Concern, that's the group that's supporting the Battersbees through this. Now they think it is likely there will be a last-minute court hearing at the High Court this afternoon. That is not confirmed, but they do think it's likely because the courts will want an answer as quickly as possible for the family on this. But we know how passionately Holly Dance and both parents of Archie feel about this. They want Archie to be moved away from the chaos and the noise of the hospital. They want to take him to the peace, the quiet, the sanctuary of a hospice. The Trust here thinks that moving him is not in his best interest. They think it will cause him to deteriorate quicker. They gave us this statement. They said, our deepest sympathies remain with Archie's family, and we aim to provide the best possible support to everyone at this time. And it is important to note as well that the life support machine for Archie Battersbee was supposed to be switched off at 11 o'clock this morning. The hospital will now not make any changes to Archie's care whilst that legal proceeding is going on. But where Archie spends his last hours is now going to be decided by the High Court, and it's going to be an agonising wait for his parents as to where their son dies. Will it be in the hospital behind us, or will it be in hospice care?
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you so much. Ellie Costello there, bringing us the latest, doing just a brilliant job of filling us all in on the details. How dare they? How dare the Hospital Trust
Thanks so much.
say that they will not move him because it might be dangerous for Archie? But this is a boy whose life they are willingly and complicitly ending. None of that makes any sense. That's just cruel.
Well, if they say, I don't see how it's consistent to say that he's simultaneously dead, but that that moving him will cause him, trouble. The whole point has been that there's nothing left to him anyway. So I don't see what the harm would be, what substantive harm there would be in moving him. at all. I think what they're achieving, actually, this hospital, in blocking these families' reasonable attempts, I think, is sort of mobilising people against them and mobilising people in favour of Archie Battersbee's family. From the beginning, I said, look, I think the mother should... I think the mother knows best. I do truly think that. And if it was I think lots of people put in this position would be fighting tooth and nail to stop the hospital, stop judges who are not connected to their own child in any way, shape or form, to stop making this decision for the mother. I know lots of people will say, look, doctors know best and you need somebody who is removed from the situation to give an objective view. But as I keep saying, I think it's not about objective views at this point. I think it's a moral question of who gets to decide how your own child is laid to rest. And
awful.
Yeah.
Awful. It's good it's not my child. I don't think I can be responsible for my actions in that hospital. Now, we will keep you up to date with all of that, and we are very much thinking of the Battersbee family. OK, we need to move on. The high cost of petrol has been yet another thing we've all been dealing with, isn't it, as the cost of living crisis rumbles on. Dealing with the high prices will clearly need to be a priority for whoever is our next Prime Minister.
Yes, well, according to the RAC, the average price of petrol actually fell in July by nearly 9p, certainly something I've noticed. However, wholesale petrol prices fell by much more than that, by 20p, in fact, over the last 8 weeks.
So why aren't these lower prices being given to us, the customers? Joining us now to talk about this in more detail is Howard Cox, Director of the Fair Fuel UK campaign. Thank you so much for joining us, Howard. And I see that in today's Sun, you are calling for a 20p cut in VAT on fuel.
Fuel duty.
Fuel duty. Go on, why?
Well, it's a very simple thing. You saw the RSA spotting fuel has come down by snail's pace. Just let me give you an example. Since June the 1st, pump prices for petrol went up by 10p. But their figures aren't quite correct. The actual wholesale price came down by 27 pence. So you're looking at a 37p swing. Now, the government in Germany have cut fuel duty by 25 pence. In France, it's about 13 pence. In Spain, it's 17 pence. And Ireland, I think it's 20p. They recognise the cost of living crisis. Everything in this studio was once delivered on a truck. Everything, it impacts on inflation. And we're seeing inflation at 9.4. We saw yesterday it might be hit 15% next year. One of the most incredible statements you hear always after someone announces about inflation rises, it's usually down to pump prices. And it's usually associated. So it's pump prices and food prices at the moment are actually are fuelling, sorry to use the pun, inflation. And to cut a long story short, we need to cut fuel duty, just like the rest of Europe. And I've got a lot of sympathy. I've met with Liz Truss, I've met with Rishi Sunak. They haven't openly said it to me, but I think Liz Truss would do it.
Yes, I do want to ask you, though, because when we say sort of cut tax, what we're essentially saying is reduce the amount the government is taking into into its coffers. I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, fuel duty receipts in the United Kingdom amount to about £26 billion. So, by extension, what you're saying is reduce the amount the government is taking in tax, an amount that is very, very substantial, and an amount that it is using to redistribute and, prop up public services. How are you going to plug that gap?
Well, Mercy, I expected that question. And it's no surprise you thought I'd expect it. It's very simple. In the last year, the government got an extra £4 billion from the extra because of VAT, because of the high prices of fuel. They've just got a £5 billion windfall tax. That's a total of £9 billion. We want about £8 billion of that to cut fuel duty. It won't impact on the Treasury whatsoever. And if you put more money into people's pockets, it will help small businesses. Corporation tax will be up. There'll be more of that because they'll be growing rather than being stifled by this incredible pressure of high fuel prices. It's a very simple economics. Cut taxes, more growth.
Tell me about those conversations you had with Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was invited to... I'm not a Tory member. I'm apolitical. I have to be running this campaign. But I was invited to a couple of the Tory associations, one in Tunbridge Wells and one in Maidstone, with the respective MPs at the time. And I put the question to both of them, why are you not cutting fuel duty like Germany? If they can do it by 25p, why can't we?
And what did they say?
Well, they went that sort of thing. But to be fair to Rishi, he did say he's doing a lot in terms of compared to Germany in other areas of actually helping the cost of living, which is fair comment. But he said that, and he shook my hand, he nearly shook my neck, because he said I've been the bane of his life with Robert Halfon MP for the last 10 years, because we've had a freezing duty and got that 5p cut in March, which no one saw.
Yeah.
And Liz Truss was, I think, a little bit more direct. Says, I'm having an emergency budget, and all growth taxes decisions will be on the table.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah. So what do you make of yesterday on the show? We discussed BP profits and indeed profits of other energy and fuel giants. What do you make of those? Is it time for yet another windfall tax? Because they're monumental, those profits.
Yeah, I mean, a windfall tax goes against every moral fibre of me or business fibre of me. I think it's wrong. But in this case, my mantra is profit is good, but profiteering isn't. And this profiteering that's going on at the moment, further up the fuel supply chain, driven by these big oil companies, has to be checked. It has to be scrutinised. And that's why we're also calling, so our second ask, as well as the 20p cut, is for a body called Pump Watch. We've got Ofcom, we've got Ofcom, but 37 million UK drivers do not have any consumer price protection. So please, can we have a Pump Watch body? And I've got massive support from backbench MPs. And I hope that, if we combine Pump Watch and get a fuel duty cut, you could see pump prices coming down by 30 to 35 pence.
OK. Howard Cox, Director of Fair Fuel UK, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing as well. I think it's fair to say, isn't it? Thank you from all of our viewers and all of our listeners that somebody is doing something for us on our fuel prices. Keep up your great work and do come back again if you have any good news for us.
Yes, now shall we move on to another story? Premier League footballers will stop taking the knee before every football match this season. The league says that players have decided to use specific moments during the upcoming season to take the knee, which they say will amplify the message that racism has no place in football or society.
Although not all players agreed to take the knee in the first place, last year Crystal Palace forward Wilfried Zaha said he thought that taking the knee was degrading. He added, quote, "Growing up, my parents just let me know that I should just be proud to be black, no matter what. And I just think we should stand tall."
Yes, well, it's taking the knee just a gesture that actually avoids having to take on any meaningful action or to tackle racism at all, which is something I've been arguing for a long time, personally. Well, here to discuss this with us is Tony Burnett, who's CEO of Kick It Out, which is an organisation that works to tackle racism in football. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Before sort of taking the knee, Kick It Out was the organisation that was fighting racism in football, and nobody that I know had an issue with it because you were actually taking substantive action to do that. Taking the knee has to many people seemed like a gesture, just a gesture. Do you agree with that?
Well, it is a gesture, but I think it's been a positive gesture. This is about players, and this group of players are more active than any generation before. And what the message around taking the knee was that they've had enough. Now, I think the challenge is that arguably the expectation has become that players, it's their responsibility somehow to drive the changes that are needed, and I think that's ridiculous, to be honest. I think we need to get back to really understanding why players were taking the knee. And when I look at some of the challenges that I think we're just alluding to them, Mercy, we've got a situation where we're still not seeing any improvements in the numbers of black managers and coaches coming through the system. That has to change. We've had one black referee in the history of the Premier League, and he retired in 2008. We've currently got no black referees. We've got one black referee in all 4 divisions of football at the minute. And we've got a woefully few South Asian players that are managing to make it to professional ranks, despite the fact that we've got great representation in grassroots football. None of those issues are challenges that the players can address. By taking the knee, they highlighted them, but what we need to get back to now is putting pressure on the people in power to make change in the areas that they control. That's not about players.
Can I just ask you $1 million question, which is that you mentioned there those statistics about the low levels of black referees and black players and other sort of positions as well. What do you attribute that to? Is it racism?
I think I'm always wary of banding that word around because I think it's used far too often. So if I look at refereeing, which is probably the most stark example, of course there are some incidents where we've been reported and looked into where racism is really clear, actually. But I think on a bigger picture, this is about systemic bias. This is about people in positions of power that self-replicate because You know, we're all human beings. They recruit in their own image. They recruit people who look like them, behave like them. I think the challenge we've got in football is that quite often the systems and processes that you'd see probably in some bigger organisations and other organisations to make sure recruitment processes are fair aren't necessarily there. And so there's stuff that we can do systemically to make sure that Black and Asian players, coaches, etc., and women as well, get equal opportunity to opportunities within football. Boardroom appointments is another great example. You know, the lack of diversity in football boardrooms is remarkable, and we've got to change all that stuff.
Tony, I don't really watch many football matches anymore. There was a time when I did used to watch it more, probably 20 years ago or so. So just tell me, do you still get the heckling from the stands that we used to get in the days of John Barnes and co? Do we still get racist chants from the crowd, or has that largely gone away?
Yeah. Well, it's not just racism. So we cover all forms of discrimination. Our biggest increase in chants last year was LGBTQ plus chants and real verbal aggression towards LGBTQ plus players or perceived LGBTQ plus players, because actually no players in the Premier League are out as being gay, but you know, fans made their own mind up and started to abuse people anyway. So that stuff has not declined. I'm pleased to say that we're seeing a small decline in online hate, because there's a huge amount of work gone on in the last 12 months to make sure that people can be found and prosecuted when they do discriminate online now. So, and we're optimistic we can make headway in that. But you know, football's a reflection of society, as you guys know, and I think we're in a position now in society where it's quite a challenging discussion, and I think racism has to be and discrimination has to be tackled, and it's not going down in the terraces either.
Yeah, just very quickly, of course, we saw that Women's Euros win, which I still can't believe, actually, now, a week later, now that I've just said it again, I can't believe we actually won. Lots of people commented that it was a much more family-friendly environment than what they're used to. When it comes to men's games, they felt that they could take their kids there and wouldn't have to worry. Do you think we would see that kind of aggressive chanting and that kind of overt racism? Do you think people would be... Do you think we would see much of that when it comes to women's games? Or is it actually something quite specific to do with male games and the crowds they attract?
It's a really good question, and I was lucky enough to go to quite a few of the games of the Euros, and I agree with you completely. And the atmosphere, the culture, I love it, actually. I really enjoyed it. And the lack of toxic masculinity, for want of a better expression, the tribalism just wasn't there. You know, people standing together, supporting different teams, and I think that's what sport should be all about. And I do absolutely think that we've now got a reference point when it comes to women's football that we can look at to say that's the cultural model we should be aspiring to, actually, in the men's game, to create an environment on our terraces where people do feel welcome and people don't feel as though that they're in the middle of a war zone quite often when you go to a football match.
God, it's strange, isn't it? Yeah. But that raises all sorts of questions, though, doesn't it, about culture and about what men need, like the tribal need in men to be aggressive in the stands. I don't think that's all bad. I know that's controversial. It's not all bad. Men do need a space where they can go and tap into their inner caveman. But we can't have that at football matches, putting people at risk and not feeling you comfortable to take your children to watch a football match. That's not okay.
Yes, well, we do have to leave it there. Tony, look, thank you so much for coming on, talking to us about this very important issue. Tony Bennett, the CEO of Kick It Out, which works to tackle racism in football. We're going to take a short break now, but keep all your thoughts coming in at gbviews at gbnews.uk. We will be back with plenty of views and plenty of stories after this break.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. A fresher feel out there today. We've lost the humidity. Most places dry and bright with sunny spells, but there are a few showers across parts of the north. Low pressure way up to the north. High pressure that will be moving in over the next few days. Between the two, the breeze coming in from the northwest. So it's areas that are exposed to that breeze that are most likely to see a few showers across western Scotland, some for Northern Ireland, and one or two have been feeding in this morning across parts of northwest England. The odd one getting into Wales as well, and we'll keep a few going across northeastern Scotland through the day. But for most places, certainly for the Midlands, south and east, it's going to be dry and bright with sunny spells. Not as warm as recent days. Temperatures, though, still getting into the mid-20s across the southeast, high teens further north with that fresher feel. And a few more showers coming in this evening for western Scotland over the Highlands, the Western Isles, and coming into Northern Ireland too. Elsewhere, again, most places will be dry, perhaps a bit more cloud for a time across the southeast and East Anglia, but it will be a fresher night. Temperatures may stay in the teens across the southeast in urban areas, but mostly we're looking at high single figures or 10 to 13 degrees as the minimum temperatures. That's how we start Friday. Sunny spells for most, though. Again, certainly across the Midlands, southern England, South Wales. Further north, a few more showers likely tomorrow coming into parts of northern England and across Scotland. Maybe even one or two heavy ones moving through at times, but they will tend to move through. Again, on the cool side, certainly across northern Britain, temperatures below average. Further south, there's some sunny spells getting into the low 20s. Still a few of those showers around on Friday evening across northeast England, eastern Scotland, but they should fade away, I think, quite quickly. So for most, it's a fine Friday evening with clear spells. Quite chilly, actually, to start the weekend, but it's going to warm up as we go into next week. A bit of patchy rain in the northwest, but otherwise, most of us having a dry weekend with sunny spells.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, it's just gone 11 o'clock and this is To The Point on GB News with Bev Turner and me, Mercy Moroki, on your TV, radio and online.
We're with you until midday, getting straight to the point. The day's top stories with expert guests and lots of opinion.
Yeah, so make sure you get in touch with your views on our usual email, which is gbviews@gbnews.uk. We have got lots of them to go to, so we will be going to them in just a moment. But before all of that, let's give you the latest headlines.
Good morning, it's just gone 11 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Interest rates are widely expected to go up again for the sixth time in a row. The interest rate currently stands at 1.25%, but it could go up to 1.75% today, the largest increase in nearly 30 years. The Bank of England will announce its decision soon, hoping to slow the rate of rising prices. The UK is already at its highest level of inflation in 4 decades. Ofgem has announced the energy price cap will now be updated every 3 months instead of every 6, warning customers face a very challenging winter ahead. It says the change will go some way to provide stability in the energy market, making sure customers are only paying the real cost of their energy. Ofgem boss Jonathan Briley cites Russia's actions in Ukraine as being behind the volatile energy market, leading to a surge in gas and electricity prices. Archie Battersbee's mother says she prays the High Court will do the right thing to give her son a dignified death. It's after the family have submitted an application to the High Court to move Archie to a hospice. In a statement, Holly Dance has said it would be inhumane if they are refused permission to move the 12-year-old from the Royal London Hospital into palliative care. Archie has been in a coma since April. Speaking to GB News, Attorney General Suella Braverman-Kaye called the situation tragic.
This is a very, very complex matter. Of course, the parents have the best interests of Archie at the forefront of their mind. Weighed against that are clinical considerations and medical opinions. And I know that English judges will have considered this very sensitively, very thoroughly, and have reached the right decision.
In the latest hustings for the Conservative leadership race, Rishi Sunak once again attacked Liz Truss's economic policies. The Foreign Secretary reiterated her promises to cut tax and grow the economy without driving prices higher. However, the former Chancellor warned against cutting taxes before inflation is brought under control. Latest polling shows Mr Sunak is trailing behind his rival, but he insisted he was hopeful.
I will apply that same urgency, that same energy, that same grip and radicalism to tackling all of our problems, reforming public services, growing the economy, tackling migration, putting in practice those conservative values of hard work, of aspiration, of hope that we all hold dear to build a better Britain. But more than that, I promise you all this. I will give you my everything, my heart and my soul, everything I've got.
Rishi Sunak there. Meanwhile, Ms Truss is also coming under pressure to make good on a promise she reportedly made to a group of war widows to restore their pension payments. A change in the law in 2015 means war widows who remarry no longer lose their £7,000 a year payment, but around 300 service widows who married before 2015 have not had their widow's pension restored. One of the widows, Margaret Allen, is calling on Ms Truss to fulfil her commitment.
I would ask her to stand by that statement and resolve this now. It's almost 7 years we have been campaigning to get this corrected. All we're asking for is parity with our peers. We've struggled, we've been traumatised and stressed for 7 years. Enough is enough.
Tensions are escalating between the US and China, with Beijing staging its largest military exercise near Taiwan so far. It includes live ammunition drills and more than a dozen warplanes in the waters surrounding the region. China is accusing the US of playing with fire after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi met with Taiwan's president yesterday. She's the most senior US politician to visit that country in 25 years. Taiwan is a self-governing democracy that China considers part of its territory. A new report says government policy is increasing the risk of asylum seekers being exploited in the UK. The British Red Cross and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees found what they called key witnesses in the current system, including inadequate training for government officials, delays in decision-making and too little support. The report cited examples of vulnerable asylum seekers forced into modern slavery and sexual and labour exploitation. The amount of coral growth at Australia's Great Barrier Reef has reached record levels. Researchers say it's the most coral cover they've seen in 36 years, but experts warn it's still vulnerable to threats. They say mass bleaching and climate change could quickly unravel the progress made, even though it's a resilient system.
But as of today, it's still a fantastic place. It's still vibrant and it's still kicking. And it really gives us hope that if we can reduce carbon emissions, and we can really give the reef, the best chance to maintain its natural beauty into the future.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's return to the Point.
Good morning, it's 11:06 and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moreki and Bev Turner. We're on your TV, radio and online, and here's what's coming up in our final hour.
Britain's forgotten war widows are calling on Prime Minister candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss to restore their war widow pensions after some were stripped of them. Our Home and Security editor Mark White brings us an exclusive insight into their fight.
Yes, and despite 60 British women a day being diagnosed with one of the 5 gynecological cancers, just 2% of us know what all 5 are. We'll speak to a GP who wants to raise awareness of taboo issues around women's health.
And finally, our national reporter Paul Hawkins will join us to explain how thousands of potential home buyers may soon be finding it easier to get on the property ladder in these financially difficult times.
Yes, well, we have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, and you can get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
But first of all, I have my fresh coffee because I'm going to enjoy Mercy giving her views on racial segregation in schools.
This morning, I would like to bring to your attention something rather niche, but nonetheless infinitely important. Senior educators in America are increasingly advocating for school students to be taught only by teachers who are the same colour as them. Yes, you heard that right. They say that, for instance, black students do better when they have black teachers, Latino students do better when they have Latino teachers, and so on. In an article published on Monday, the authors of a book published last year called Teacher Diversity and Student Success have made fresh calls for, quote, prioritising teacher race as a policy. And by the way, this is not some minor book that nobody takes seriously. This was published by Harvard Education Press, the publishing arm of Harvard University's Graduate School of Education. In other words, by the top university the world has ever known. And actually, these authors go further. They say this in this new article: policymakers should prioritise diversity even as challenges around vacancies and shortages arise. In other words, when governments are faced with chronic shortages of teachers, when classes are burgeoning for lack of teachers, and kids of all races are faced with poor quality education as a result, even then, these people say the government should still look around and say, guys, I know how we can make education better. Racially segregating our classes. I mean, it's beyond madness. So, how could sane, educated people possibly come to that conclusion, you may ask? Well, the authors argue in their latest article that having a same-race teacher improves students' test scores, their attendance increases, as do their chances of going to university. Now, many other people, by the way, have researched this issue and come to pretty much the same conclusions. But quite frankly, I'm not interested in their so-called evidence. You know why? Because sometimes the ends simply do not justify the means. Their research is not some sophisticated solution to solving educational inequality. I'm going to call it out for what it is. It's out-and-out racial segregation. Now, Spanish philosopher George Santayana once powerfully said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And it's true. History repeats itself. Now, in 1954, the Supreme Court of America outlawed racial segregation in public education in the famous case of Brown v. Board of Education. It would be another 10 years after that until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 would rid America of racial segregation laws. Now, these so-called academics and educators really think that going back to racial segregation in any form is a step forward. It's a slippery slope. It's a reductio ad absurdum of the highest order, because once you make the argument that teachers must match the race of their students, then you open the door to all manner of similar demands. So do disabled students have to be taught by disabled teachers, for instance, gay students by gay teachers? Well, what about students who are mixed race? Do they get one black teacher and one white teacher? And don't get me started on religion. Now, all of this might seem niche and far away, but it matters. It matters because it flies in the face of everything we hold dear about living in a free Western society where all races are equal under the law, where we actually want to integrate with different races rather than live in some xenophobic insular community where we assume people who don't look like us must be bad for us. And it matters because what happens in America, slowly but surely, makes its way across the Atlantic and onto the shores of Britain. If we don't push back on this morally depraved, pseudo-scientific segregationist nonsense, we will set back Western society decades.
Yes. Fabulous, thank you. It's interesting. It genuinely makes me think, because like you say, where does it end? Would I go in and say, well, I would like my children to only be taught by a divorced teacher because that's like them. They, they can relate to them in some way.
Yeah, I think you've actually just made me think about something else, which is obviously these people who are, renowned professionals in their fields who've written this book. They're renowned people in the education world. They're obviously calling for Black or Latino students to be taught by Black or Latino teachers. But what would happen if a white person, was to say, well, white students should be taught by white teachers? I don't think there would be that same response. Well, they would argue that, well, that's because there's evidence to show Black and Latino students are the most disadvantaged, and therefore we have to have, special rules for them that don't necessarily apply to everybody else. But for me, it's the very concept that we have to sort of start dividing people, dividing students and classes by what race they are. I mean, that is, in the early 20th century style thinking.
It is. And actually, the irony is, of course, that young children, primary school children, are quite colourblind. Don't really see it. They've got their friends. They don't really define who they are in that way. And that's a great thing. And then somehow we all too often manage to culturally condition them out of that.
Yeah, and what I feel as well, and actually, do you know what? Let's bring in somebody who's an excellent person to speak to on this. And we're also going to be talking about another positive story in relation to race. That one's obviously quite depressing, but there has been a positive one, which I'm just going to mention before we speak to Inai, which is that a 50-year-old Sky engineer has won £14,000 in a discrimination claim after an inclusion advocate in her workplace insisted that because she was mixed race, then she must obviously be oppressed.
Oh, sorry. Jane Bradbury. Well, I was listening to you then. I thought you were going to... I was enjoying your monologue so much. I thought you were doing another one. Jane Bradbury was told that because she wasn't white, this had to mean she'd experienced prejudice, something that Jane insisted simply did not match up with her own lived experience.
Yes, well, the tribunal ruled that the inclusion advocate's remarks were blunt and were based on the assumption that just because Jane was mixed race, basically she was oppressed, and that this amounted to racial stereotyping. And we can now bring in our culture and social affairs editor, Inaya Falarin Iman. Now, I think these two stories side by side are quite interesting because on the one hand, you have absolute racial madness, which is how I would classify it, where you're seeking to actually say people are so oppressed that they should actually be taught by people of the same race because people of a different race can't possibly understand. And then here in Britain, we actually have what is a positive story. Somebody's been told you must be oppressed because you're mixed race, and they've said, hang on, you're racially stereotyping me, I'm going to take you to court, and they've won.
I think the subject that you highlighted in your monologue is a really interesting one. What it really demonstrates, at least for me, is how the racialisation of all aspects of public life produces really shoddy scholarship, quite frankly, because actually I don't know what cherry-picking evidence that they found, but let's even look at the UK. The highest ethnic minorities in terms of their educational outcomes is Indian, Chinese and Nigerian students. So these populations, particularly Chinese British people, make up a tiny proportion of the population. The idea that because they don't have Chinese students overwhelmingly represented in education, that has been some kind of barrier to them.
Chinese teachers.
Chinese teachers overrepresented in education, that must be a barrier, is patently false. But also, you can also apply that to America also. There is still a lot of racial segregation in America. And actually, the fact of the matter is the overwhelming majority of people teaching African-American kids are Black teachers in many majority Black areas and vice versa for white students. So it does not translate into necessarily better educational attainment, better confidence, not just because what they're saying is false, but because human beings are multifaceted. The notion that our race is the only lens to which we view the world and the fundamental lens to which we relate to people, as you rightfully mentioned, to me, is rehabilitating much older ideas which said that your race tells you something about your moral character or your outlook. And we are now considering these ideas of virtue, which for generations we worked to understand were fundamentally wrong and inhuman.
I wonder what the reasoning is then behind the people who've written this It was a book, wasn't it?
And then
actually?
they've written an article.
And the report and the article on it. I guess what they might conclude is that let's say the black children taught by a black teacher were inspired. They could aspire to be like the teacher. So it's about this idea you've got to see it to be it. Would that be the logic, do you think?
Well, I think undoubtedly representation is important and matters, and we like to see people from our background, our community, our experiences reflected in public life. But it's like if we look at the footballers, for example, you touched upon that in a previous segment. Marcus Rashford, Raheem Sterling are related to by millions of young people across the country, regardless of their background. And actually, people mainly find inspiration by what someone's achieved and what they've contributed and their individual personal characteristics, not because of their skin colour. I mean, we look at Parliament, there's many different ethnic groups within Parliament. That doesn't mean that I relate to what their political views are more. And I think it's actually really counterproductive if we think that. But on that specific case about the Latino colleague, who I think it's really interesting, actually, that this is the consequences of when we think in this racial way, that actually just because someone is an ethnic minority, that must mean they're oppressed. And that woman was saying, well, actually, that made me conscious of my skin colour in a way that I previously wasn't. And I was worried that people are now going to be judging me based off of my skin colour. That is a new form of racial stereotyping and racial segregation.
Well, I can see hundreds of people if that's the case. I'm not going to be a millionaire out of this. Because so many people have tried. When I've said, oh, I don't feel oppressed, I don't feel particularly, disadvantaged to be in this country because I'm black. Lots of people who are in the sort of diversity and inclusion lobby world have just said, I'm pandering to white supremacy or whatever it is they come up with. But that is my experience. Why does your experience count and then mine doesn't? It's very odd.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's also just historically inaccurate. There's always been different views amongst ethnic minority people about the nature and scope of racism within British society and what to do about it. I mean, we've touched upon America. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King had very different views about what should be done to combat racism in America. And the idea now that we should only have one view, and that's the absolute truth, is just, fundamentally wrong.
Yes, well, Inaya, thank you so much for coming on to discuss that really interesting topic. Now, after the break, we're going to be discussing Britain's war widows who are calling on the next Prime Minister to restore their war widow pensions, and our Home and Security editor, Mark White, will bring us an exclusive insight into that fight. That's all after this weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. A fresher feel out there today. We've lost the humidity. Most places dry and bright with sunny spells, but there are a few showers across parts of the north. Low pressure way up to the north. High pressure that will be moving in over the next few days. Between the two, the breeze coming in from the northwest. So it's areas that are exposed to that breeze that are most likely to see a few showers across western Scotland, some for Northern Ireland, and one or two have been feeding in this morning across parts of northwest England. The odd one getting into Wales as well, and we'll keep a few going across northeastern Scotland through the day. But for most places, certainly for the Midlands, south and east, it's going to be dry and bright with sunny spells. Not as warm as recent days. Temperatures, though, still getting into the mid-20s across the southeast, high teens further north with that fresher feel. And a few more showers coming in this evening for western Scotland over the Highlands, the Western Isles, and coming into Northern Ireland too. Elsewhere, again, most places will be dry, perhaps a bit more cloud for a time across the southeast and East Anglia, but it will be a fresher night. Temperatures may stay in the teens across the southeast in urban areas, but mostly we're looking at high single figures or 10 to 13 degrees as the minimum temperatures. That's how we start Friday. Sunny spells for most, though, again, certainly across the Midlands, southern England, South Wales. Further north, a few more showers likely tomorrow coming into parts of northern England and across Scotland. Maybe even one or two heavy ones moving through at times, but they will tend to move through. Again, on the cool side, certainly across northern Britain, temperatures below average. Further south, there's some sunny spells getting into the low 20s. Still a few of those showers around on Friday evening across northeast England, eastern Scotland, but they should fade away, I think, quite quickly. So for most, it's a fine Friday evening with clear spells. Quite chilly, actually, to start the weekend, but it's going to warm up as we go into next week. A bit of patchy rain in the northwest, but otherwise, most of us having a dry weekend with sunny spells.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Good morning, it's 24 past 11 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and I'm joined by Bev Turner today. We're on GB News and live on your TV, online and radio.
Now, hundreds of British war widows are calling on whoever becomes the next Prime Minister to right an historic wrong and reinstate their war widow pension. Until 2015, those whose partners died in active service were stripped of their pensions if they remarried. It seems a bit harsh. Although the law was changed 7 years ago, around 300 people who'd married before were not included in the new scheme. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, spoke exclusively to some of the widows who say they've been forgotten by a government that simply doesn't care.
He lived for flying. You marry somebody in the Air Force, you marry the military, and everything that comes with it.
Jude Howcroft's husband Bill was killed in a flying accident behind the controls of his RAF Tornado in 1998. In the months before his death, Jude recalls one particular conversation where her husband insisted if the worst ever happened, she had to try her best to move on with her life.
Bill actually sat me down and said, right, we need to have a conversation. Things do happen, you've seen it. And I want you to promise me that if you fall in love again, you don't hold back and you live your life for me and the kids.
7 years after Bill's death, Jude finally found love again and remarried. Official government policy meant she automatically lost her £7,000 annual war widows compensation payment.
But I have never stopped loving Bill. Ever. But the fact that I had to give up my pension, it was almost being judged that how dare I find love again. I clearly couldn't have loved my first husband. And it just makes me so angry.
In 2015, the government changed its policy, ensuring any war widow who remarried still received their war widow's pension. But hundreds who'd remarried before that date were not included. They are, they say, the forgotten widows.
What's wrong? It's immoral. It's discrimination. And the compensation, which is called the war widow's pension, is the only tangible link these individuals have to their late husband.
40 years after the death of her husband Ian aboard HMS Argonaut in the Falklands, and although Margaret Allen remarried, she is still profoundly affected by his loss. She met the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liz Truss, in 2018, who promised to right a wrong, to ensure that war widows' pensions were restored. Margaret's now calling on the woman who may well be our next Prime Minister to make good on that promise.
I would ask her to stand by that statement and resolve this now. It's almost 7 years we have been campaigning to get this corrected. All we're asking for is parity with our peers. We've struggled, we've been traumatised and stressed for 7 years. Enough is enough.
We are the forgotten few. Our husbands paid the price, but that injustice remains. We're not asking for anything that isn't rightfully ours.
Well, Mark White joins us now live in the studio to discuss more about this. Mark, so this is the case of a law not being retrospectively applied to those who it affects, basically, and that's where this point about it being fundamentally unfair comes from. Why did the government take that decision to not let it apply to those beforehand?
Well, it beggars belief why, for the sake of 300 widows, they didn't make it retrospective to allow them to have parity with the others, because clearly the government recognises that the armed forces families occupy a special place in the nation. Armed service personnel are asked to go into battle, sometimes pay the ultimate price. And this war widows pension, it's called, but it's really just a £7,000 a year small compensatory payment that is an acknowledgement, really, on behalf of the state that it wasn't just the ultimate sacrifice paid by the partner of someone in the armed forces, but also their family, their widow or widower and, their children, that they've had their life ripped apart as well.
Yeah.
And it's an acknowledgement that the state recognises that and cares.
If I've understood this correctly then, Mark, so the idea is that when they remarried, that they no longer required that money because their new partner might somehow support. It's a very old-fashioned concept, isn't it? As though the woman is somehow beholden to their new partner financially. This should never be about that.
Yeah, and it's not means-tested in any way. So, the state doesn't know how well off or otherwise anyone who was in receipt of this war widow's pension was, and it's stripped away. But as I say, the war widows say to me, it's not even the money as such, it's just the feeling, they say, that they're being judged. They say it's almost as if, how dare you sort of put this all behind you, go on, start living your life again and remarry. Well, fine, if you do, we're stripping this away from you.
It's
and that's what they
punitive.
feel. They feel that's unfair. And actually, to be fair to the government, the armed forces chiefs and others, they acknowledge that, they've realised that, and that's why they changed the law in 2015 to ensure that if you are married to service personnel and they're killed in the line of duty, if you then move on with your life and remarry, you won't be stripped of this small payment. It needs to be retrospectively applied, though. And what is really tragic is that it was 300 war widows in 2015. It's now down to about 220. They're dying off at a rate of about a dozen a year because they are, for many of them, of an older generation. And so they're dying without actually, having this restored, this acknowledgement that, you did suffer.
Yeah.
So if we mentioned there that these women are calling for whoever becomes the next Prime Minister to make a change in this law, has Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss made any indication that they might consider that?
No, other than, according to the War Widows, Liz Truss making a specific, they say, a promise in 2018. She was Chief Secretary to the Treasury then. She met with a group of War Widows who explained what had happened and their desire for parity. And they say that Liz Truss then said that she would right a wrong. Well, 4 years have passed. That has not been righted, that particular wrong. And they're calling on Liz Truss, if she makes it into Downing Street, to do something about it. It will be interesting to see what she does because, she is a woman that her mantra has been, we've heard it at pretty much every stump speech she's been given, that she doesn't break her promises, that she gets things done. Well, demonstrably 4 years on from what the War Widows say was a specific problem, nothing has been done. I should say we've reached out to the Liz Truss campaign. We reached out to them yesterday. They acknowledged receipt of our desire for a comment, and they've not got back to us.
OK, thank you, Mark. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Yes, I think so. £7,000, 300. So 700,000 times 2.1 million a year, roughly.
It's not a lot, really, given we spent
really a lot.
35 billion on track and trace.
I don't see what the delay is, but we will update you on that, of course, here on GB News if anything happens with all of that. But we are just going to go to some of your views before we take a short break. We were speaking about, of course, Archie Battersbee a bit earlier. It does seem that the parents have now exhausted all options, although they have applied to have him moved to a hospice so he can die there instead of the hospital, which they've had a very fractious relationship with, of course. John says, Ben has narrated a really good synopsis of the situation.
Bev.
Yes.
I'm Bev. I'm not Ben.
Just call you Ben.
Despite these days of gender fluidity,
I thought...
I am Bev.
I misgendered you. I misgendered you. Thanks, I concur, and good luck to the parents. Janet says, don't trust the medics one iota, hypocritical when they make these decisions about a young life, then insist on keeping elderly and critically disabled alive, even when they don't want to be. That's a very interesting comparison.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And people have been responding to your monologue as well. Dawn has said, well done, Mercy. Call it out for what it is by Harvard. It's racial segregation. History on repeat, but it would be racist if whites demanded only white teachers.
Yeah, well, it's just need to mention it's not Harvard, but the book was published by Harvard. So in a way, it's a bit of a tacit endorsement of the ideas, you could argue, but just it's not Harvard specifically. But after the break, we're going to look into how men and women across the country are failing in their knowledge of the female reproductive system. And we're going to be speaking to a GP, a female GP, who is seeking to correct this. That's after your morning headlines.
Hello, it's 11:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Interest rates are widely expected to go up again for the sixth time in a row. They currently stand at 1.25%, but could go up by 0.5% today, the largest increase in nearly 30 years. The Bank of England will announce its decision later, hoping to slow the rate of rising prices. The UK is already at its highest level of inflation in 4 decades. Ofgem has announced the energy price cap will now be updated every 3 months instead of every 6, warning customers face a very challenging winter ahead. It says the change will go some way to provide what they're calling stability in the energy market, making sure customers are only paying the real cost of their energy. Archie Battersbee's mother says she prays the High Court will do the right thing to give her son a dignified death. Holly Dance says it would be inhumane if they are refused permission to move 12-year-old Archie from the Royal London Hospital into palliative care. Archie has been in a coma since April. In the latest hustings for the Conservative leadership race, Rishi Sunak once again attacked Liz Truss's economic policies. The Foreign Secretary reiterated her promises to cut tax and grow the economy without driving prices higher. However, the former Chancellor warned against cutting taxes before inflation is brought under control. They face each other again later today in a televised debate in Cardiff. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, it's 38 past 11 and this is To The Point with Bev Turner and myself, Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
60 British women are diagnosed every day with one of 5 gynecological cancers: womb, ovarian, cervical, vulval and vaginal.
However,
you were going to hear all those words in one morning, did you?
Yes, well, however, charity Eve Appeal says that only 2% of the British population actually know what these 5 cancers are, and it's part of the shockingly wide gender health gap between knowledge of and understanding of men's health issues compared to women's health.
But the Eve Appeal are looking to fix this by going into schools and teaching children about anatomy, menstrual health, HPV, FGM, female genital mutilation and cancer. It's because in their surveys they found that only 9% of adults were taught about these things at school. What great news.
Well, Dr. Aziza Sissay is a GP and an ambassador for Eve Appeal and joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. We mentioned there about kids, the low number of kids being taught about this in school. I often find that kids are willing to engage with this kind of thing. They almost find it funny sometimes and a bit cheeky learning about anatomy. I think it's the middle-aged men, if anything, who get unnecessarily creeped out by it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You know what? It's one of those things, isn't it? Unfortunately, when it comes to gynecological health, as soon as you mention it, a lot of people are shocked. There's a lot of shame and stigma associated with it. There's a lot of taboo. And there's that hypersexualization when it comes to anything women's health, anything gynecological health. So I agree with you that it is certain groups that it affects much more. I mean, children are curious. For instance, my daughter is only 4 years old, and I have taught her the correct gynecological names, the correct external genital names, which quite a few people have found shocking. But it's really important that we teach them at the younger ages. She doesn't find it uncomfortable. She doesn't see anything wrong with it, just like head, shoulders, knees, and toes. They need to be aware of these things so we can strip the taboo. And then when they grow older, they won't have that association of being embarrassed and feeling ashamed, and so that they can seek the help sooner to reduce the suffering, because there's so many people suffering in this day and age, so many women and people who have gynecological organs suffering with these conditions in silence because they're embarrassed. And there's so many people, unfortunately, dying or getting diagnosed with really sinister diseases or conditions, again, because they're either embarrassed or they're not aware of what they need to do or what they have.
So I guess the one that we're all familiar with is cervical cancer. Okay, when it comes to cancer of your lady bits, that's the one that we all know about. But what are the other common ones that we may be less aware of, and what should we look out for?
Yeah, okay. So the survey said that 2% weren't able to, only 2% were able to name all 5 of the gynecological cancers. And I've actually brought my favorite bit of prop. And I wondered if I could ask you questions on the female reproductive anatomy, the internal anatomy, because showing this image to a lot of different people and women, whatever gender, they're unable to name all 5. So, for instance, if I point to this, Mercy, sorry for putting you on this spot.
Uterus?
Yes, excellent. And Bev, what's this?
Fallopian tubes, ovaries.
See, we've got a competitive girly SWAT here. She's beating me to it.
And then this bit here.
Cervix.
What is this bit here?
Cervix. Vaginal canal.
Yeah, and then
the cervix is here. Just for those listening on the radio, this must be very confusing right now if you sat on the M25. But just to be clear, our doctor is holding up a plastic anatomical medical model of the female reproductive organs.
Yes.
Yes.
Carry on.
And I'm testing Bev and Mercy, and they're getting everything right. So this area here is the vagina. And the reason I wanted to emphasize on this point is that quite a few people, unfortunately, aren't aware of the difference between vagina and the whole internal gynecological anatomy, and also the difference between a vagina and the vulva. So with regards to the other gynecological cancer, you have ovarian, you have uterine, you have cervical, you have vaginal, and you have vulval.
Oh, wow. I really did not know that you could have cancers in all of those areas. What are everybody's sort of taught the signs, well, not everybody actually, but we are taught what to look out for in terms of cervical cancers. What kinds of signs and symptoms would you be looking out for the other types?
Yeah, so a lot of them interlink with each other, and it's because of where they are. So one of the most common one is any form of irregular bleeding. So that includes bleeding in between your periods, bleeding during or after intercourse, and this is a really important one, bleeding after the menopause, because a lot of women and people who have gynecological organs are not aware of the fact that if they've had their final bleed, so menopause is once you haven't had a bleed for over a year, and then they bleed again, they think, oh, it might be my final bleed. That is a red flag. You need to get seen. Other symptoms include persistent bloating. So that's usually associated with ovarian cancer. So persistent bloating that doesn't come and go, and it stays longer than 3 weeks. Getting pelvic pain, sort of groin pain in that area. Also, if you notice a foul-smelling, thick or black, dark discharge, particularly if you've never experienced that at all. And then what I would emphasize is anything that is different to your normal. So if your periods were always regular and light, and all of a sudden they become really heavy and extremely painful, that's something to be alarmed about. And that's something that you should go to your GP to be assessed for. Not because I'm saying that it's going to be anything sinister necessarily, but so that we can exclude that as a cause. And if it is a cause, we can pick it up early, so hopefully we can treat it and it's curative.
Can I ask you, Aziza, what age group do you think this should be taught to? Because we don't want to scare young girls. These cancers are very, very, very rare anyway, particularly in young women. So what age group do you think we should introduce this kind of detail?
So what I really like about the Know Your Body program is that it is aimed towards 7 to 13-year-olds. But what's really good is that they've made it quite sensitive. The younger age groups get the knowledge more about the anatomy and their menstrual and so on. And it is tailored to what their understanding would be. I certainly think, and we'd be surprised, children are much smarter than we realize. And I think as young as 13-year-olds, just bring the awareness about this. Because the reality is, unfortunately, I know you said that it's rare, 22,000 women and people with gynecological organs are diagnosed with a gynecological cancer every single year. That's 60 people a day And that's 21 women who are dying every single day of gynecological cancer. And it will affect the children.
Yeah.
It will affect their mothers, their sisters, their family members. So we need to encourage the awareness to be raised quite early on. And I know that it's scary for some, but these conversations need to be had at a sensitive way. And then we build it up as they get older with regards to the detail.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, is it not? I want you to come into my children's school. I really do.
I want you to be my doctor.
I know.
I feel infinitely informed after all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Aziza Sasay, thank you so much. She's a GP and an ambassador. And her Instagram, which is Talks with Dr. Sasay, has over 14,000 followers. She posts videos on how to self-examine and how to attend your cervical screening and just lots of anatomical knowledge.
I will be following as soon as we're in the next ad break.
All the middle-aged men can come out from behind the sofas now. It is safe to come out. But anyway, let's move on to our last story.
Let's move on to a more masculine topic. Big day if you've got a mortgage.
Hey, women have mortgages too.
Or you're thinking, I've got one. Or you're thinking of getting one, because the Bank of England is expected to raise the interest rates by as much as 0.5% today. And that'll be the biggest interest rate rise in the UK for 27 years.
That's what it comes after the independent living standards think tank, the Resolution Foundation, said it thinks inflation will hit 15% at the start of next year, pushed up by soaring energy bills. Paul Hawkins reports.
Another day, another rise in the cost of living and potentially your mortgage repayments.
And that's because later today, the Bank of England is expected to raise interest rates, possibly by a whopping 0.5%. Now, that would be the biggest increase since 1995. It would mean just over 800,000 people on tracker mortgages would see their repayments go up immediately. And just over 1 million people on standard rate variable mortgages would see their repayments potentially go up later on.
In fact, a 0.5% increase in interest rates could add around £74 a month to a typical variable rate mortgage, or £888 a year based on a 250 grand loan with a 25-year term.
I'm very, very worried about taking out a variable rate mortgage. I know someone who did that 2 years ago and it's already gone up 3 times in that period.
Serena is 24, a first-time buyer looking to get a mortgage and a flat in London.
So it is very stressful to kind of think about the interest rate rise and what that might mean for me, who has to make a decision about whether to kind of fix a mortgage straight off the bat now or kind of take my chances and wait it out.
Has the interest rate rise and just the general increase in the cost of living made you think twice about buying your own place?
After 3 years of living at home, I've saved the money, but now it's just a case of I have the money saved, but the environment I'll be buying in is just so up and down. It's making me think, do I wait a year? But who's to say the situation will be any better in a year?
So why is the Bank of England increasing interest rates? The reason is inflation. In other words, prices, which, as we know, are sky high and continuing to rise.
The bank's been very clear. They want to make sure that we don't get into what's called a wage price spiral. And that's when inflation rises, people go to their employers and they say, look, inflation's higher, I'd like a pay rise. They want people to think that inflation is under control or will come under control so that they don't go and ask for pay rises, which feeds already high inflation.
But is raising interest rates an old school method for tackling modern inflation? Some economists argue that 1980s high inflation was different to what we're experiencing now. Back then it was driven by demand. We kept spending, so prices kept rising. The inflation now is caused by a lack of supply when it comes to energy, fuel, food and labour. Plus, the workforce today is very different to what it was back then.
Right now, unionization's at about 20%. Public sector employs only about 17% of people. So that risk of a wage price spiral is a lot less likely than it was in 1980.
So, with energy bills and the cost of fuel sky high, what's the advice from the money experts?
So look at everything that you're doing. Look at where you're shopping, how you're shopping. Look at waste. Look at how you're using your home, your energy, how you're getting to work. And every little thing that you do to save money will help.
For millions of us, mostly middle and working class, the cost of living is becoming the cost of surviving.
And that's why many people think the government is going to have to help out again. The question is, who does it help? How much help does it offer? For how long? And who pays for that help? Paul Hawkins, GB News.
So, Paul Hawkins joins us now to follow on from that package. Hi, Paul. How badly is this going to impact people with mortgages?
Yeah, hi Bev. If you're on a standard rate variable mortgage or a tracker mortgage, then straight away your payments are going to go up. If you're on a fixed rate mortgage, and there are 9 million mortgages in the UK, 75% of them, 3/4 are fixed rate mortgages, then you're not going to see any change in your mortgage repayments straight away. But on a standard rate variable mortgage of £250,000, you're likely to see, and that's over a 25-year term, you're likely to see an increase on monthly repayments of £74 a month. It's about £888 a year. You don't need me to tell you that there's a cost of living crisis, that bills are sky high and set to go even further to stratospheric levels very soon. That makes a big difference to people's budgets that are already squeezed. Frankly, there isn't much left to squeeze, but the bank's doing it because of inflation. It wants to take money out of our pockets so we spend less, the theory goes. And so by doing that, it just starts, prices will hopefully start to fall, or if not, at the very least, stay the same and won't be driven up by demand side inflation. I hope I've explained that in a reasonable way. It is quite technical stuff. It's dry stuff, but it's really important.
And Paul, why is the bank doing this when so many people are struggling? Because people will feel like they're getting hit from all sides by the government and these non-governmental institutions when it comes to the money in their pocket.
Yeah, put simply, the bank needs to tackle inflation, right? Inflation is the rate at which prices rise, and a big part of that increase that we've seen at the moment, it's 9.4%. A big part of that increase is because of energy bills, which we know are soaring and set to go even further. So what the bank wants to do is to make sure that this kind of inflation that we're experiencing at the moment is supply side inflation. There is a lack of supply of energy, there's a lack of supply of fuel, there's a lack of supply of labour, of food, and it's driving up the price of everything. What they don't want us to do is to then start spending money, so demand side inflation adds to that and continues to push prices up. So that's why they're raising the interest rate. Also, they don't want to see what they call a wage price spiral. That is, all of us start to think, you know what, prices are going to be high for a really long time, so I'm going to go to my employer, I'm going to ask for a wage increase. My employer gives me that. Of course, wage increases for an employer are a business cost, so its costs go up. The business then has to put prices up because wages have gone up, and then of course when prices go up, we then think, God, prices are going up, I'm going to have to go back to my employer, and so we get caught in this cycle of wage price rises. Now, that's what happened in the 1970s, the 1980s. Back then, it was a big problem, and governments acted, at least when governments controlled interest rates in this country, by putting interest rates up. There are some people who think you shouldn't be putting up interest rate rises now because all of us work in a different kind of economy where we're not all unionised. There isn't that mass labour unionised movement that can then go on strike if we don't get the wage price rises we want, and so you don't need to worry about wage price rises. But that's one of the concerns that the Bank of England has. They're going to make the announcement in the next 5 minutes or so. We do expect them to go up by 0.5%. Also look out for forecasts on growth as well, and also forecasts on inflation, and also something called quantitative easing, where they pump loads of money into the economy. We're going to look at the bank, the first stage of the bank starting to roll back that process that's been going on for many years now. But that's quite technical stuff. What we're looking for in the immediate start is interest rate rises, how much they're going to go up by.
OK, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Tapping into my A-level economics there to sort of understand a bit of that, the relationship between inflation and interest rates. But also the fact that they want us to spend less just makes no sense to all those businesses that are struggling.
Honestly, some of this to me, I have to say, goes in one ear and out of the other. There's a reason I decided not to continue with A-level economics when I was
I do find it really interesting, and it's the kind of thing that we have to be aware of, because we all have to balance our books, don't we, when we're going to supermarkets at the moment. It's tough.
Yeah. Quick view. Alan says, people are complaining about a rate rise to 1.25. Back in the 70s and 80s, my mortgage rate was 15.5. I lost my home to this. This country has no future with the weak people we've got here now. So some perspective offered there by our viewer and listener, Alan from South.
And there's no doubt that people will default on their mortgages. It's going to get really tough for some people. Yeah, and lots of you have been getting in touch, but I think we've finished, have we? We're done for the day.
Yes, we have. We are done for now, but we're going to leave you with the brilliant Esther McVeigh, who is doing the briefing today. You're going to be back tomorrow.
I'm back at 2 o'clock on We Need to Talk About.
Yes.
If you've not had enough of me, I'm back at 2, and we'll both be back. Oh, no, I'm back tomorrow.
You're back tomorrow. Yeah, so see you then.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. A fresher feel out there today. We've lost the humidity. Most places dry and bright with sunny spells, but there are a few showers across parts of the north. Low pressure way up to the north. High pressure that will be moving in over the next few days. Between the two, the breeze coming in from the northwest, so it's areas that are exposed to that breeze that are most likely to see a few showers across western Scotland, some for Northern Ireland, and one or two have been feeding in this morning across parts of northwest England. The odd one getting into Wales as well, and we'll keep a few going across northeastern Scotland through the day. But for most places, certainly for the Midlands, south and east, it's going to be dry and bright with sunny spells. Not as warm as recent days. Temperatures, though, still getting into the mid-20s across the southeast, high teens further north with that fresher feel. And a few more showers coming in this evening for western Scotland over the Highlands, the Western Isles, and coming into Northern Ireland too. Elsewhere, again, most places will be dry, perhaps a bit more cloud for a time across the southeast and East Anglia, but it will be a fresher night. Temperatures may stay in the teens across the southeast in urban areas, but mostly we're looking at high single figures or 10 to 13 degrees as the minimum temperatures. That's how we start Friday. Sunny spells for most, though, again, certainly across the Midlands, southern England, South Wales. Further north, a few more showers likely tomorrow coming into parts of northern England and across Scotland. Maybe even one or two heavy ones moving through at times, but they will tend to move through. Again, on the cool side, certainly across northern Britain, temperatures below average. Further south, there's some sunny spells getting into the low 20s. Still a few of those showers around on Friday evening across northeast England, eastern Scotland, but they should fade away, I think, quite quickly. So for most, it's a fine Friday evening with clear spells. Quite chilly, actually, to start the weekend, but it's going to warm up as we go into next week. A bit of patchy rain in the northwest, but otherwise, most of us having a dry weekend with sunny spells.